Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the People and Culture Essentials videocast. I'm Jonathan. I'm the coordinator of the PCA, also the People and Culture Association. This is a vibrant group of members who join us from different parts of the world and who are people professionals, mediators, reflective practitioners, restorative justice facilitators, HR managers, people managers, and that group is just growing in diversity. There's a lot of insights coming in from different individuals from different parts of the globe who are trying to make workplaces better, who are trying to create happy, harmonious, healthy workplaces. And that's what we're all about. The PCA is a think tank, it's a membership for people to come and share best practices and share insights and talk about successes and challenges that they are facing in their workplaces. We've had some fantastic guests joining us on the People and Culture Essentials videocast since last year. And today I have two legendary guests with me, and I'm really excited to be introducing them to you as well, of course. Joining me all the way from Florida and Vermont, Michael Lang and Suzanne Terry. Many of you know Suzanne, Susan in the US, but since this is a British production, we're going to add the "and" back. And we're going to do Suzanne for today. I hope that's okay with you, Susan. But I'm so happy that you're going to be joining us today on this very important video cast. We're going to be talking about reflective practice, mediation, and mindfulness. For those of you who do not know of Michael's and Suzanne's work, do follow them on LinkedIn, and you'll be able to keep in touch with the fantastic work they've been doing for the last few decades now. And of course, I'll be sharing more information about Reflective Practice Institute, which they both have founded, and of course, I will be representing today as well. But just a very quick introduction, of course, Michael Lang has been a mediator for the last 44 years now, has been dedicated his time both as a trainer, a mediator, and a conflict consultant, of course, as an author as well. During my time as a student of mediation, I read a lot of Michael's work in my classwork. So, he has been an inspiration to me. Susan as well has spent the last over 3.5 decades now as a mediator, a teacher, and has spent the last few years now rooting herself in reflective practice. And Michael and Susan, of course, have co-founded the Reflective Practice Institute, and which we're going to get to very soon. Um, Once again, Michael, Susan, thank you so much for joining us. And those of you who are joining us live on LinkedIn and YouTube, use that comment section. Tell us what you feel. You don't have to agree with everything that Michael, myself, or Susan say. So you can put out your comments, you can put out your questions, and we're going to take them up and try and address them as much as we can. But let's get started. Let's get straight to it. And I always like kind of breaking the ice with the guests on the PACE videocast by asking them what's getting to know a little bit more about them. So I would want to know a little bit more about how you both like to unwind on the weekends. What do you do? I know you're very much into reflective practice, but what do you do on the weekends? Uh, Susan, if you have caught your breath, I know you've had a strange workout just before the video cast. So let's get started with you. Susan, you might be on mute. You might have to unmute yourself.
Of course. Why didn't I remember that? Uh, my husband and I live on a farm that is a tree farm in Vermont, which is quite beautiful. And a lot of times we're just driving around looking at things on the farm or out walking on the trail or seeing what's new or how things are growing, et cetera. So that's one big thing for me. I do music whenever I can. And I also, weekends are a time when I do storytelling. So that's a time when I might start thinking about new stories or characters that I'm going to incorporate into my stories.
Lovely.
And
And I'm sure a lot of the stories are inspired by those walks in the farm.
yes.
Nice. Michael, how about yourself?
Uh, my weekend usually begins with a trip to the farmers market. A local with they have local produce, flowers, breads, all sorts of things. It's a lovely, it's a social gathering place as well as a wonderful place to buy some food. And then put I often will spend. I fortunately I live in an area of exquisite beaches and the Gulf of Mexico, and I try to get to the beach just if only to walk and to appreciate being there. I rest up from the week because I have very busy weeks, and it's also a time when I can concentrate on my writing because there are no other activities. And the last, and perhaps almost most important, it's a time for me to catch up with my family, my children and grandchildren.
So what I'm hearing is, of course, a very healthy routine of unwinding from both Michael and Susan. They've got their time, spending the time there to get inspired by not just the spaces that they visit in the neighborhood, but of course also the people that they're with. And today is all about people and culture. Today is all about working and finding the best way of working with the different working environments that we are part of in our lives. And I want to get straight to it actually. Michael, Susan, of course, you all have been mediators in your own rights, have had accomplished careers over years, but how did it get to, deciding to work with each other and move into the space of reflective practice? I'm very curious to know how it all got started.
All right, Michael, I'm gonna start with the short version of the story. Michael and I were both at a conference. Um, I had not met him. I had never laid eyes on him. There were about 150 people in the room. People were asking questions of other people on the panel. And of course, those questions usually end up being little speechettes that people are going to give. And they'll say, well, here's what I think. And they'll go on, and then they'll ask a question. And near the end, we were almost done. This gentleman in the back in a yellow sweater, which I always have to say, stood up and asked a question. And the way he asked the question was such a wonderful invitation. He went back to something that someone on the panel had said, asked them to explore it and explore their thinking around it more deeply. He set them up for a perfect opportunity to uh, you know, to talk more about what their thinking was as opposed to responding to him. And something just went ding in my head. It went, I've got to meet that person. I had asked a question also, and at the end of that session, everybody's trying to get out of the room, and I look up and I'm trying to find the yellow sweater. And when I located it and started toward him, I caught his eye, and we were looking at each other. We were trying to find each other because of the questions that we had asked people. So, Michael, anything you want to add to that one?
Smart, smart move, Michael. Yellow jacket, not too difficult to find you.
That was it was a sweater my mother had given me that I adored and wore often, both because she gave it to me and because I love the sweater. Um, and I felt going to that meeting, um, and this would have been close to 40 years ago, or maybe even, yeah, I would say 40 years ago. And I had been doing my bit of practice on my own in Maine. I didn't really know a lot of there weren't other mediators in Maine. So first of all, walking into a room with a group of colleagues was just, it was like being at a smorgasbord and being hungry. And um, just I was voracious in wanting to understand what was happening. The panel Susan was on with two or three of her colleagues from a school in Vermont were talking about the connection between what they thought and what they did. I had never heard anybody talk that way about the work. People will tell you stories about what they did, they will tell you the techniques they use, but they never tell you what's going on up here, what they're thinking. And I was mesmerized. I was thrilled, and it took the reason I was probably the last one to ask the question is because it took me so long to get up the courage to stand up in front of a group of people and ask a question that was different from what everybody else had been asking. And because I was so desperate to make a connection with Susan and her colleagues, that I reworked that question probably 30 times in my mind before I had the courage to stand up and ask. And so grateful. Look, here we are. Um, and that look that Susan describes, um, is essentially the same. We have grayer hair these days, but the look that we have when we are together, is the same. It's that look of recognition of somebody of like disposition, like mind, um, values, and it's allowed the two of us to have just an extraordinary friendship and professional working relationship.
Yeah, we talk about chemistry, we talk about that sparkle, that kind of really gets two minds together. And it could be just as you said, it was the question, the pressure of asking the right question, and I think it could be something as small as that, which is now kind of evolved into something so amazing. When I think about reflective practice, and there are people from different parts of the world who join us on this video cast, of course, from different professions as well. I'm sure they'll find this all interesting, because today we're going to talk about reflective practice, and it doesn't matter what you do. It's all about putting that into gear, putting reflective practice into your toolkit. And when I think about reflective practice, and I want to run this thought by you, it is always about. I used to always feel like we spend so much time trying to put into practice the theories and concepts that we learn. If whether it's mediation, whether it's people and culture, whether it's human resources, we have learned something, whether it's at a training or at a course, and then we come back and we want to try and practice it. But I feel like reflective practice is kind of completes the circle, wherein you get a chance to kind of theorize once again what you have practiced. So you've of course taken a theory and you've tried to, of course, put it into practice. But I felt reflective practice was a way of kind of completing the loop, where you have now gone on and practiced something. You are practicing every day, and it gives you a chance to kind of theorize your own, as you said, to think back, to kind of reflect on what you did and why you did it and how you did it. It gave you a chance to kind of theorize your own practice in many ways. Would you agree with that idea?
Yes,
Oh,
exactly.
thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you. I was really
Exactly.
scared there.
It was a,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was a question of which one of us was going to nod and say yes first.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's two things for me that about what you said that are really important, Jonathan, and that is it is the integration of what we think and the skills that we have. So, uh, too often, what happens is that we learn a bunch of skills, we become adept at using them, but we don't have the grounding in why we are using the theory, essentially, that explains why you would do something at a certain time in a certain way for a certain effect. We
Mhm.
don't think, we react. And we may be immensely skilled at being able to do questioning or any other sort of intervention in our work. And again, it doesn't matter. And I'm glad you said this because our work in reflective practice, while we deal almost exclusively with a range of conflict practitioners, um, the work of reflective practice is essentially universal. It's both personal and professional. It crosses every border. So A, it's the integration, and B, it is the commitment to learning and growing. So that the fundamental idea is that we use reflective practice as a means of really learning from and through our experience, of challenging ourselves, not just to be more skilled, but to be more resilient and resourceful in understanding how best to use those skills in a certain moment for a certain purpose. And then to be able, because this is one of the things that theory lets us do, helps us do, is to step back and assess, was that intervention helpful? Was that question useful? Was that comment? If it was, why? That's important information. If it wasn't, why? What can I learn from that situation? So that's a start, and Susan will pick up and add her perspective.
Yeah. The work in reflective practice is about understanding why I make the choices that I do. Very often when you ask someone, um, why did you choose to do that? They'll say, because I was trained that way. That is probably the least reflective response you can make. You were trained that way, but you also have a range of responses you can make. Um, it's very seldom, always in every circumstance you do this. So in that situation, what was my intention? What was I thinking? What were the filters that my perception of what was going on is being run through? What static was I putting into the air that kept me from seeing things clearly? And now in hindsight, oh, having learned that, how does that clear the way for a more effective intervention in the future so that we're not running on automatic? Uh, and this can be a process that takes us an hour to think through, or it takes us a minute and a half to think through. But it always comes back to the same thing. Why did I make that choice? What was my intention? How did I carry it out? And how do I now evaluate it? And if there was something I was bringing to this that was unhelpful, how do I move that out of the way?
Right. This is very interesting because we are basically asking ourselves to be more contemplative in action, to be thinking regularly about the decisions we make and the choices we make at the workplace, in the different roles that we play, uh, whether leaders or those who are part of a team. And I think what I'm really curious about is right in the start, and we're going to get deeper into how you're designing a reflective practice session, and about groups and stuff like that. But I think at this point in time, I'm very curious about this one thing that has really impressed me about reflective practice, because at least in the field of mediation, and a mediator myself, you know, there used to be a saying. I don't think I agree with it anymore, but someone once said that mediation is a lonely profession. And mediators do not have that space to kind of go and share stories, share challenges of the that they are facing day in day out in the mediations that they do, because it is a confidential setting. It is a setting where you are responsible to the parties in the room, and you cannot be basically going out and completely opening up about what's going on to a colleague, especially because sometimes you have challenges beyond the facts of a conflict itself. It's more about the parties in the room and their personalities and their and their characters, and what they bring to the table as the emotions, and the people who are actually in the room. So when I came across reflective practice, I think it was a fascinating tool where I felt like it was finally a chance to do this in a very, very respectable manner, in a manner that you could completely respect your parties who are at the table, and yet have that space, that confidential, safe space to amongst peers to come and share about some of the challenges that you're facing. So I just want to kind of get your reflections on that. How is it difficult from, say, how is reflective practice as a group and reflective practice groups different from, say, a mediator who's having a one-on-one coaching with a more senior mediator? How is it different? What are those qualities and values that you being part of a group that really helps?
So that for me, the question is, is that coach doing this in a reflective manner,
Hmm.
which they very well may be, and we have many examples of coaches that work from a reflective process, uh, or is it instructional? Or is it corrective? Are they, a program director who has someone working in it may need to make sure the quality of the program is good or something like that. Um,
Hmm.
but the question is the person who the practitioner, the HR person, or the manager, or whoever is coming with the thing they're trying to figure out or exploring, is the person who is helping them approaching it from the standpoint of, let's see what you already know about this, but you may not know that you know it. I'm here to help you reveal what you understand already. And it's the person who's trying to help the other person. If I'm trying to help you or trying to help Michael, I don't want to be throwing out solutions. I don't want to be pointing in a direction. I want to be helping them strengthen the muscles and the habit of saying, okay, now why do I think I did that? What was I noticing in the room? What was my response to this? And why was that? Uh, so you may be working with a one to one mentor who is doing that. You may not. So it depends. And there are a lot of people who do excellent mentoring and coaching from a reflective standpoint that similar to what we do.
Hmm.
They don't even think about it. They don't call it that. They just call it good coaching or something else. And in saying this, and I also want to say, there are times and positions when if you have responsibilities for somebody's professional practice and you say, let's hold on, that's not legal to do
Hmm.
that, or you're putting yourself at risk. There are times when that rolls. So we're never saying you can't do any of that. We're just saying this is one aspect of professional development and mindset that we're trying to help people strengthen. So, yeah, one to one or groups. You're either using the reflective approach or you're doing something different, and that's fine. Michael, would you agree
Also,
with that? The descriptor of that.
Yeah, definitely. And the mindset and the approach is exactly the same if you're working one on one or if you're working in a group. There are advantages to being able to work in a group. It doesn't mean that we can't do effective reflective practice work even on our own. That's how I learned how to do this was was practicing myself, trying out ways of thinking. But sometimes we need to get out of this sort of self-referential cycle where we're just doing our own thinking and sharing the experience with others. um, really does that. There's also research that says um, that um, that you can really improve the quality of the reflective work in a shared process where you do it in a sort of systematic rather, and structured way, um, where there's an organizing principle behind it, which is why we do our reflective practice groups. Susan and I might do individual work. We share situations together where we each act as a mentor, coach, whatever you other word you might want to use to describe that relationship, where we're guiding one another in thinking through a puzzling situation that has occurred. Um, I like the idea of a group it because it does, as you said, Jonathan, so much of our work is private, it's individual, it's confidential, and we can get outside of that very contained box that we live in, necessarily live in. But it allows us to get outside that by meeting with people in an equally confidential setting, um, not because they will give us advice, but they will do exactly what Susan is saying. And that is, just like the facilitator of the group, they're going to ask questions. But because they don't have the same, as Susan would put it, the same brain as everybody else in the room,
Hmm.
their perspective about what might be happening is a little different. And so they bring a unique question to the person,
Hmm.
and not advice, not suggestions, not recommendations, not judgment, but question. And so having a group of people really expands the opportunities to learn.
Yeah, I do see the value in that, and I completely agree on the fact that there's a limit to how much you can be self-reflective and how much of contemplation you can do every day, and and think about your choices, think about the decisions you made as a leader or as a manager, the things you said, things you did, and there's always a limit to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan, it's sometimes that's all you have. You don't have the opportunity, either in the moment or in general, to work with anybody else.
Mhm.
And also, um, some people are more naturally reflective, meaning they appreciate the opportunity to go inside, to think, to examine, to turn over something and work it through. And some don't. Some
Yep.
need to talk it out, some need to write it out. And so for each, the principles are the same and the basic methods are the same, whether they're practiced individually, practiced one-on-one, practiced in a group, practice in a setting where a person is a supervisor or a coach or a mentor or a colleague.
Right. Yeah, and I want to dive deeper into this. But for those of you who are joining us live on LinkedIn and YouTube, this is the People and Culture Essentials videocast. We are live with Michael and Susan today, talking about reflective practice, mindfulness, and professionalism in our workplaces. So if you have any comments, you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments section, and we will take them up and address them. Michael, I want to dive a little deeper into, we are saying. It's about creating these safe spaces for professionals, for leaders, to managers to come and share their challenges and invite perspectives from their peers. But it's also, I'm thinking, it's also a difficult one, right? Because there are sometimes, and a lot of our viewers today might be in positions where they're leading big teams with a lot of people who kind of are accountable to them and who they are accountable to, and there is that risk of coming across, say maybe incompetent, or there's that fear of saying, uh, I'm not being able to manage a situation, and should I go and take this outside, the confines of my workplace? So let's get down to, how do you constitute a reflective practice group, and how do you make sure that, as a mentor or as a facilitator, how do you make sure that that psychological safety is guaranteed in a reflective practice setting?
I think part of the key of it is you just don't throw people into a group and say, now we're going to do this and we'll ask each other questions,
Right.
because um, and I can only speak about the geographic and cultural arena that I grew up in. And um, in the United States, we love the idea of problem solving, and we love to help people solve problems and fix things. And I'm sure that's true in other places. So as soon as we hear something that people are puzzled about, we try to fix it. Here's what I've tried before, or have you done this, or have you done that? So we will gravitate to that because that's how we were raised, and it's a wonderful skill that we have, but that's not what we want to do. So you have to have a leader in the group who is steeped in this mindset and practice that keeps us all on track. So we make sure that our focus, so if you are sitting in the chair that is bringing the issue you want to think through, that we don't interfere with you by throwing out a whole bunch of suggestions or trying to redirect you or whatever. We are only asking questions to support your exploration so that you can see what you truly do know or find the solution that begins to feel right to you. And that will include saying, what other resources do you need? Is there other information from outside? Because you may need to know a bunch more about some stuff. And you say, oh, yeah, well, I guess I do need to check on this, or the other. Uh, but you have to have someone who's steeped in it, who has done the practice, and can assist the group in doing that. Otherwise, we'll gravitate back. We found it in our own groups that we practice in that happens easily.
And would you say, Michael, this is because we have viewers from different professions joining us today, and I know that you work very closely with mediators and a lot of workplace mediators as well. How relevant this is to, say, HR managers, leaders, people managers who are coordinating their, say, own internal dispute resolution schemes, mediation schemes, investigation schemes, where they are managing a panel of internal mediators or investigators. How can they really put this into practice? How can they design it?
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, everything that Susan and I are talking about, these ideas, the principles and the methods, they're absolutely universal. I mean, I can tell you stories, Jonathan, about just the other day having a conversation with the young man who repaired my roof. And, and we had, I I was asking him how he went about doing his job. And there he was, he doesn't know what I know and the kinds of things that and he said, well, let me tell you my theory about how I went about thinking. I thought, this is fabulous, Um, but let me bring it back to HR. Um, I have I have taught and worked with HR professionals and supervisors, and in two ways. One, groups of those people who then share their experience in their role as HR professionals or supervisors. So they themselves constitute a reflective practice group,
Mhm.
and they share the puzzle. They, because for us, when we bring a group of people together, we're interested in the surprising, the unexpected, which can be a wow moment.
Mhm.
Oh, something happened that was quite stunning and wonderful, or it can be something that's just really irritating and frustrating. And
Yeah.
and so I've been able to work with them, and they share their experiences out of their roles. And we use the same reflective practice process, the mindset, the theory, and the methods that we would use with conflict resolution professionals.
Mhm.
The second thing is that I have run webinars and training courses for those same practitioners, the HR professionals and the supervisors. So, how in their role, when they are mentoring, coaching, supervising, even disciplining someone, can they bring the reflective practice mindset and process into their work? And
Mhm.
so it works. Uh, it doesn't, it actually, the initial reaction was, no, 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 this can't work. I'm a supervisor. That means going back to what Susan said about problem solving. I've got to problem solve. I've got to tell somebody what to do. And what we point out to them is you never give that up. You
Mhm.
never give up, as Susan said earlier, you never give up your responsibility to hold someone accountable if that needs to be done. We are adding an additional tool that can help someone help themselves become more adept and resourceful.
Right.
and supervisors in particular have really appreciated having another way of being able to work with people they supervise.
It's almost like adding an additional brain in the room, trying to look at the same situation, we're having multiple brains kind of working with you, trying to get to that process. And thanks for that comment coming in there, Natalia. She talks about how it's necessary for mediators to be part of reflective groups. She talks about whether you can help out with a few tips. But I actually want to get down to a very very basic question. And there's another question that's coming to me privately where the viewer is asking, what would a typical reflective practice session look like? If you could break that down for us.
Go ahead, Michael. Oops, you're muted.
We got a pattern that's working. If you don't mind going first, or if you prefer that I do, it's okay.
Okay. No. So most of the groups kind of people check in because you get to know people. We're working online mostly, but other groups can work in person if you're there in the same place. That's fine. But the groups we work with are all from all over the world. Um, and how you doing? What's the weather doing? Is everybody okay? Etc. Uh, and then almost always, does someone have something that is burning? You're in the middle of a situation, um, and or there's something that's been keeping you awake at night. So we find out what the lay of the land is, so we'll decide how to divide our time up. Most of the groups we work with are 90-minute groups, um, and there are others that work with a lot shorter time. Our friend David works with one that's a much shorter time. But people in the group have learn a method, a very simple method of preparing to present. Here's what I'm trying to figure out for myself. Always, what am I trying to figure out for myself? Why is this a problem for me? How does it bother me? So people get very good at outlining only the information that's absolutely needed to get you started. So people don't need to know every bit of detail. So an HR person might say, I'm running across this thing that's really generational. We've got some of the younger workers who don't like doing such and such, and older workers are getting irritated by that. And I'm finding it's a really big problem. Someone starts off, and it'll be one person or the group leader will ask a few initial questions to get people grounded a little. And then what it will begin to look like is, well, what are you noticing? What do you think you're already seeing? And why is this bothersome? What is it doing to you? Oh, you say that here's what they're trying to do. How did you come to that conclusion? How do you know that? What is telling you that? So it's inviting an people to question how they got to where they are, why it's bothersome. You'll talk about that, and constantly you're coming back to only the question that they are raising. And that question may change over time because they go, oh, what's really bothering me is this, not that. All right.
Mhm.
But you're staying there. So it's not like you're going, and by the way, you need to be focusing on this. We don't get to do that. So they may spend 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Some instances it could be longer. And then we'll be saying, so where are you now? Okay, they'll say, here's what I think I need to do. I think I need to sit down with them and go over uh, these kind of things and see if they're clear about that, see if there's any resources they need. So they will identify where they are, where they're coming out. Many times they say, I'm not sure. Here's something that I need to think more about. And they'll sit with it for another couple of weeks. And then one day when they're waiting for the stoplight to change, they'll go, oh, and it'll pop into their brain. Okay. Uh, and then we'll move on to another person who is bringing something. So you divide up your time. Very often people will say, I have something that's an old case. If somebody has something they're in the middle of, I'll defer to them. Otherwise, this is something that happened 5 years ago and I'm still curious about it. So that one will sit on the back burner. You do a case that's live, one that's present, you finish. Nobody else has one. Let's take the one from 5 years ago and think through that. What do you think happened there? We get quite a few of those. People still trying to understand something that happened a while ago. You close up the session, uh, and everybody understands you do not return to the material. You don't call somebody, and say, I know you get tripped up on this. I ran into some more information you might want. You leave it. It's in people's hands.
Yeah,
It's a pretty
purely
simple
that's
format.
it's a pretty simple format for sure, but it's also it's quite delicate, uh, and I think I'm going to
Very.
ask a straightforward question to Michael here. Is I think I've asked you this when we were doing our reflective practice sessions as well. How do you make sure, as a facilitator, as a mentor, that the mediators or the participants of a reflective practice group do not get too dependent on the group, because you want them to be using their own mind, or while they're in the room, while they're outside. And yes, I understand that the questions there in the room are all intended to help the participant who's sharing the challenge to reflect by themselves. But how do you make sure that that mind does not get too dependent on what might the others think, or how should so when you're going out of the room and you're back to your practice, how do you make sure that you are not still dependent on what the others might be expecting out of you? So how do you maintain that balance?
That's a really interesting question, Jonathan. It really is. It has to begin, and Susan described this as well. It's got to begin with the leader. And the reason that it's so important with the leader is because the leader is holding the values and the principles. It's like in any group, any leader has to be able to understand well enough what are the principles and what are the goals, has to be able to express them in a way that everybody in the group can understand, make sense of, and begin to use them. And then the leader has to be consistent in how she or he does it. You got to walk your talk. You can't just say this is what we do and then behave differently.
Hmm.
So our groups, what we have seen happen is that what we are doing is simultaneously helping an individual solve a problem, and we are demonstrating and teaching everyone else this is a way you can help yourself and help others. So we are in the process of doing something. We're also showing and teaching and grounding everybody in this. And we are transparent about it. We tell folks, this is what we're doing. I always say, ask me, especially after the fact when we're debriefing, ask me any question about why I did what I did, why I might have chosen to ask the question I did. What was I thinking in that moment? Because I want them to be able to learn so that they can become engaged and active participants themselves, and also so that they begin to build the mindset of reflective practice. That, as you say, they don't only do reflective practice when they sit for an hour and a half in front of their computer screen and work with us.
Yeah.
It is something that carries on outside, and that they do all the time. So that's our goal. Our goal isn't just to solve a problem. Absolutely, we are practical, we're focused. We want somebody who comes with a surprising situation to be able to walk away with as much insight and knowledge as they can possibly gain. And we always have our mind set, our thoughts on the larger picture, which is, are we building capacity to be able to do this for yourself? Are we building the mindset to see it this way?
I think one of my biggest learnings is being part of one of the groups that we are now involved with, Michael and Suzanne, is I think during one of the sessions, one of my biggest takeaways was accepting that it's okay to be yourself. It's okay to bring your genuine self into the room, and not be afraid to be who you are, and not be afraid to share with the group what your style is and what your approach is. And I think Susan, you were part of that group when I did that session, and I took it back with me. I took it back with me beyond that day, uh, and I keep thinking about that moment every time I feel like I'm not being myself, right? And I think um, uh, reflective practice takes a lot of courage to be a part of a group, especially for leaders, managers to say, okay, we're going to be part of a group and share challenges. It takes a lot of courage. It takes that openness to learn. It takes that openness to relearn, to accept limitations in the style of practice, the curiosity to understand maybe a different perspective, the willingness to kind of change your style of how you normally operate and how you normally make decisions and choices. From your experience of doing this for years now, Michael and Susan, why do you think some people are not yet there? They're not yet comfortable to put themselves out into a group like this, and uh, I wouldn't use the word challenge, but experience this. It's a unique experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I, yeah, I want to remember to come back to that, but I also want to tuck in something that you were just asking about dependency on the group. It's if your group is done well, it's hard to become dependent upon what others think about what you should have done or whatever, or about their expectations for you, because you will never know, because that's not what we do. Um, the only expectation we have is, I believe that you can think this through, and I'm glad to support you in your thinking it through. That's what they get.
Right.
And I will tell you that that in itself is pretty addictive, to have somebody listen to you in that kind of way. And that ties in, though, to that wonderful question that you ask about why are some people not comfortable? Because people get punished in society for asking dumb questions or not being as competent as someone else, or they grew up in households um, where they were criticized. And so the feeling is, if you step into something and go, I really don't know how to handle this, I think the internal message is, oh, everybody's going to heave a big sigh and go, oh, for crying out loud, they've been an HR person for 7 years. You'd think they'd know how to handle this. That's their fear. Um, and some people are able to cross that barrier being in a supportive group where that doesn't happen. Uh, some people are not, and they may need to figure out a different way of doing this. And some people do it in stages. And by the way, in the reflective work, if someone brings the issue, so if I bring the issue and people are asking questions, and let's say Michael ask a question that's maybe a little bit deeper, well, did you have any past experiences that informed how you feel here? I am perfectly free to say, yes, but I'm not willing to talk about that yet. Everybody gets to set up their own boundaries of safety and self-respect. And then at a later time, that may occur again, and I may go, okay, so I'll share this with you. Here's what happened to me before, and I think that influences me. So people make their own way as they can. Uh, Now they may have to learn to uh, better ways of being supportive to someone else as they learn themselves to be more vulnerable. The trick is, if you've just had this great opening and you've been learned to go a little bit deeper and a little bit more self-revealing, then you want everybody to do it. Well, it doesn't work for them like it works for you. So you need to walk respectfully. So that's one thought I have about that.
Well, let me add I had I use a specific experience. I was working with an organization, and the organization decided that using reflective practice was going to be it was exactly what the group needed, and both for the workers in the organization and for the supervisors. And I was meeting with the supervisors who you could just tell they didn't come right out and say this, but what they were really saying is, okay, big guy, you can show me what you've got, but what you have to remember is I know my job already, and you're not going to teach me how to do my job any better. Um, I'm skilled, I'm knowledgeable, I have my own way of doing things. I've been rewarded for it, I've been acknowledged for it. Um, so bring it on. And I spent time talking with them about the fact that they didn't have to give up anything of what they were doing, that this was not a replacement for, this would be an addition to, and that they should try it and see it's another method that they could use. If the goal is, as a supervisor, to keep someone who has capabilities employed, to keep them working at the highest possible level of their capacities for the benefit of whomever the organization is serving. If that's the larger goal, then this is one more method to help them do that. And that they could then choose when it was appropriate. Susan likes to use the metaphor of a hat. So they could decide that they could put on, one hat that did reflective practice. But if they reached a point where they recognized that someone was missing some vital piece of information, they would put on a different hat and say, hold on a second, I need to instruct you here. Or I need to remind you of the boundaries, the rules, the ethics of our profession. So they don't give up any of that to be able to use reflective practice. And you could hear the collective sighs of relief when I said that. It was like, okay, well, let's give it a try. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. And then at least they were open to the idea, and they could then choose for themselves, having set aside that heavy layer of skepticism and uncertainty, because change is always difficult for us. And I had to point to them to say, you're not changing what you do, you're adding something to it.
Mhm.
Um, and
I think
that,
this is a
yeah,
good phase as well in this conversation, Michael and Susan. And thank you for sharing those very, very interesting anecdotes about how you all have actually taken on some of these apprehensions that uh, those who have not yet been oriented with the process and acquainted with the process have. There is a question that's coming from Graham Norris, who shared with us, and he's asking us, um, how would you compare or contrast the overall approach of reflective practice to action learning facilitation? Um, yeah, maybe it's a good time to talk about the principles of reflective practice. If we could, kind of throw light on a couple of principles that really make reflective practice stand out from, you know, I wouldn't say similar, but other processes out there which talk about development and skill development and professional growth.
The the principles uh, start with the kind of mindset and what you believe about how people learn, what people need, etc. And Graham, I would not be able to answer your question effectively um, except to say that the cycle of doing and learning from is familiar in a number of disciplines. We haven't discovered fire here. We are simply saying here is one way that we have shaped to help us in that learning process and kind of uh, going over what we do and understanding at a deeper level. One of the one of the principles that has been so important to me is uh, that of belief in the person that you're working with, and commitment to them, and to not step out of my role that tries to mold and shape them into something different. When we are working reflectively, I am there to serve them in what they are wanting to do. And I believe, just like I do with my mediation clients, uh, that this is theirs to solve. And so that's the grounding piece for me about that. And I believe that all humans can learn and grow from what they do. The other principle is, uh, and it's going to be stated inelegantly. Michael is the one who always states things so beautifully, and I kind of just throw it out there. But it's like, it's the principle of stop looking at stuff as a disaster or a huge mistake you made. Look at it as, oh, goody. Somebody has just presented me with a lot of material that I can have a whole bunch of lessons from. Okay, it felt bad. Wish I'd done some better, but this is just this incredible opportunity, and I grab a hold of it. And it's only when I honestly look at, oh, I could have done this other thing, but instead I chose to do this. And why did I do that? Oh, okay. And it'll be different for all of us. So that's my short form about the principles.
Let me, Graham, thank you for your question. I'm going to answer it in a couple of ways that won't be as complete as I would otherwise like it to be. So first of all, I have, and I believe in this, but I have in my office a piece of artwork that one of my sons created based on a quotation from Samuel Beckett that said, "Ever tried, ever failed, try again, fail again, fail better." And so, what we believe in is the notion that you can really learn from your experiences. They don't have to be failures, though it doesn't mean it in exactly that way. But but like Susan, I operate from the belief that the person who's sitting in front of me has the capacity to figure out what to do. It's my job to help them identify that, to gain the insight for themselves. And the second thing I want to say, and thanks to you I don't know what action learning facilitation is. I am in the process of writing a second edition of my book on reflective practice. And believe me, I am going to be reading up on action learning facilitation as part of writing that book, because I want to understand what that is and how it might relate to the work that we do or be different from the work that we do. So thank you for your question.
Fascinating. What I'm liking here is about, I think, is about kind of keeping that open mind to actually everything that's going on around you, to be able to in that room, once you're in a reflective practice room. I think it's about opening your mind to different perspectives that you might have not thought about, the blind spots that you might have not even considered because you were looking at a particular challenge in a particular way. And I like what you spoke about earlier, Susan, about the culture and the fact that people come from different cultures, especially in the workplace, and especially in cities which are cultural melting pots for people who have grown up in different backgrounds. I think it's a very special practice. It's a very unique opportunity for leaders in that space to kind of create this space for reflection. And at the PCA, we're talking about the evolution of HR into people and culture. We are putting people first. We are thinking about it's no longer human resources, but it's about people who are working in an organization. So I see personally a lot of relevance of reflective practice within the people and culture function. For HR managers, leaders, who are out there and who are thinking, how do I revolutionize my workplace? How, like, a lot of people have changed their designations from HR managers to people and culture managers, but they're not doing anything different from what they were doing earlier. The intention is there to do something different. There is a clear intention. There is a will. So it's all the good things that they have the right, I would say, motivation, but they're just not being able to kind of do something different, maybe. And maybe reflective practice is that one tool. It's that one thing that'll say, hey, what are the 5 things I've changed? It could be that I've introduced reflective practice into what I do today. um, I know it's a bit rhetoric, Michael and Susan, but do you agree with this? And do you feel like this could be that game changer for leaders in the workplace who are trying to transform their workplaces and make the workplaces better, keeping people right at the forefront of their policies and, yeah, structures?
I personally wouldn't say that universally. I think it's for everybody. I would say it's where are you in your organization? Where are you personally? Where do you feel like you can begin to start? And so it's not like, okay, you should put groups in or anything like that, but it is, what is it that you might learn from this practice? Um, and where would be a good starting place for each of you? Might it just be the simple practice, which some of you already do, of saying, ah, before I offer a suggestion to someone about what they might do, why don't I ask 5 questions to really understand what's going on for them? So it just very gently beginning to introduce some slight changes in how you do things. And that's only an example that may or may not apply. But, have, and it may be that you want to get together with a group of colleagues as opposed to doing something in the organization so that you can explore this. You may want to join a reflective practice group that's in existence or being formed that, and it, and one of the things you'll begin to explore is how might this be useful in my own setting, in my own work setting. Um, so it's finding that corner to catch, uh, that tells you where you are. And of course, time is an important thing for people. Where can you add this? As Michael says, we're not changing it, we're adding. Where can you add, and what aspects of this can you add that will be life giving as opposed to draining? And then go from there.
Awesome. Michael, you would like to add to that?
No, that's thank
Yeah, we're hitting the 1 hour mark, and for those of you who have joined us live on the People and Culture Essentials videocast, there's some fantastic work done by Michael and Suzanne on the Reflective Practice Institute. So do check that out. I'm going to share a kicker with you at the bottom of your screen, which where you can go and check out more about the Reflective Practice Institute. It's simple, reflectivepracticeinstitute.com. I think my biggest takeaway from this conversation is about, I think there are different kinds of practices out there and about professional growth and development, and reflective practice is different from, say, just a networking event where people come in and share best practices, maybe, or success stories. There is a structure to these sessions. There's a clear agenda to these sessions, and more importantly, I think, for my biggest learning being part of some of these groups that Michael and Suzanne uh, um, coordinating and facilitating, is that it's about the way you ask those questions, the way you invite the person who's sharing to reflect. And it seems simple, Susan said it earlier, but it's delicate, and at the same time, it's complex in its own way. And if you don't do it right, then it's no longer a reflective practice session, and it could be anything else that's out there that also can help a group get better at what they're doing. So there is a craft, I would say, and there is I would say, an art to actually facilitating an effective reflective practice session. And as for those of us who are still not oriented with reflective practice, there is, I would say, a lot of scope to learn more about this. Do follow the PCA, and we will be trying to shed some more light, of course, on reflective practice on the whole. But there's so much more that I would have loved to, of course, cover with Michael and Susan, but we have run out of time on the People and Culture Essentials videocast. I'm going to share more information with our viewers about this, of course, and so that you can go and learn more about the work that's being done in the space. Michael, Susan, thank you for sharing your morning with us on the People and Culture Essentials videocast. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan.